Okay, you're on.
All right, cool. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Nadia, and this is our War on Youth meeting. So where we look at the various ways young people have been and continue to be criminalized. We'll be going into a little more what that means. Just wanted to share just some quick logistics. We are going to keep the chat open, meaning you can we can publicly message to each other. It, gives you the chance if you want to ask or comment on something somebody is saying. Of course, we'll be keeping an eye on it since we have been Zoom bombed on these meetings before, on the meetings, and so if we see that, then of course we'll close the chat. Unfortunately, everyone is automatically on mute. Not because we don't want to hear from you, but just because we've heard some really, really terrible things said and been Zoom bombed that way as well. So what we'll do is, as we'll be, hearing from different folks. And so if there is something you'd like to ask or express, you should have a raise hand button. Or you can even send a message to the host, to us, and say, hey, can I make a comment? And of course, we'll definitely unmute you. So just wanted to share that. And I think, am I missing anything? Anybody for logistics? I think that's it, right? Okay. Okay, cool. So I'll go ahead. I'll pass it over to Akil. And yeah, thank you. Oh, and also, sorry, real quick. If you didn't see on the chat, as you come in, feel free to introduce yourself, however you feel comfortable, your name, gender pronoun, and if you're part of any org or what school you're from, you can shout it out. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. So welcome to our second Tuesday of the month, which each month is dedicated to the war on youth fight. And this is a campaign that's co-led by Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, as well as, which, by the way, is an abolitionist organization rooted in the community of Skid Row and also Los Angeles as a whole. And we fight against surveillance and criminalization and policing. And we are also co-led with Palestinian Youth Movement. And Celine, if you want to just say a couple words about Palestinian Youth Movement. Celine there? Oh, okay. I think Celine needs to be the co-host in order to unmute. Let me make sure that that's...
Go ahead and unmute Celine. I'll figure it out. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Celine. I'm with the Palestinian Youth Movement, and we've been co-organizing with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition for the past couple of years around this. And PYM is a grassroots independent movement of Palestinian and Arab youth who are organizing across our cultural, social, political backgrounds, and we're organizing towards the right of return of all refugees and displaced people and for the liberation of our homelands. And we're really looking also at the intersections between the war on terror, Zionism, and surveillance, as well as the relationship between Zionism and policing and anti-Muslim racism. So we've been combating counter-terror programs that are criminalizing our communities, and including programs like countering violent extremism, which we'll get into later. And in general, our organization also, we offer political education workshops, we do community and student and youth programs, we have a resistance arts scholarship for Arab youth, we engage in mutual aid, and organizing towards the release of prisoners, political prisoners, and we do letter writing sessions as well. So that's just a little bit about us and our work, and thank you all for joining tonight.
Awesome. So our, sorry, let me do that. Can you all see it larger now? Here we go. So our agenda for the day is we're going to do a really quick, introduction to the campaign. And then we have three main sections of the webinar today. First, we're going to hear from the Underground Scholars, a group of UCLA alumni who are working with us to confront UCLA's complicity in LAPD policing. And then we'll also have a conversation about the new turn or the re-upped turn to domestic terrorism as a narrative after the white supremacist mob at the Capitol, and the potential of a domestic terrorism bill and what that means for communities of color in LA. And then lastly, we're going to hear from the Save Arab American Studies campaign that's fighting for an ethnic studies that is liberatory and that includes Arab American studies rightfully among Asian American studies with the inclusion of Palestine and the Palestinian liberation movement. So, and then we'll end with the calls to action and closing. So for Stop LAPD Spying, we really ground all of our work in what we call the stalker state, which is basically the way that the police and law enforcement agencies work with public and private sector, government, corporations, and really in the wake of 9/11 especially, but long predating that as well, have been exchanging information and basically developing techniques to basically what people call pre-crime, to keep on pushing the suspicion earlier and earlier in criminalizing people. So this is a graphic that we use for the stalker state and the information sharing environment. And whoops. So the next thing that we're going to say is that for us in our coalition, we always ground ourselves in this understanding that surveillance and criminalization of youth is not a moment in time, but a continuation of history that goes all the way back to and before the founding of this country. We are, but this campaign specifically is about the focus on how there are programs that criminalize and target youth of color, Black, immigrant, Muslim, Native, Latinx, refugee and migrant youth as gang members and violent extremists. And that includes countering violent extremism, preventing violent extremism, Black identity extremism, and the gang narrative. Collectively, we call all of these programs the alphabet soup just because there's so many acronyms. So even before all of this, what we see as a precursor to this is the Suspicious Activity Reporting Program, which was launched basically in the wake of, again, the attacks in 9/11. And basically in 2008, they started basically creating secret files on people based on different behaviors that were deemed suspicious, that are actually just ordinary behaviors. And when Stop LAPD Spying investigated this, we found out, I mean, I wasn't part of the organization at the time, but Stop LAPD Spying found out that there was a huge emphasis, it was basically racial profiling, especially of Black women and of Black people in general. There was a hugely disproportionate number of secret files. And basically we see countering violent extremism and other programs as extensions of this, in the sense that they are anticipating violence among a group of people that are deemed to be inherently criminal, inherently extremist. And then they are also expanding policing and surveillance far beyond the police into everyday people, into organizations or trusted community members, into the medical industries or counseling or schools. So the first of these programs, Countering Violent Extremism, is based on a grant from grants from the Department of Homeland Security. It was launched in around 2000, I think it was 2012 or 2011, based on 3 pilot cities. They started off in LA, Boston, and Minneapolis, which are all cities with historic Black Muslim populations. And basically this is a way of criminalizing communities that pretends to basically offer alternatives to policing, but is really casting greater suspicion and expanding policing, again, beyond the police into other sectors of society. So then another example of this is the Black Identity Extremism report, which was leaked from the FBI. And they basically cast Black communities or Black people that were supposed to be perceiving police violence as if it's not actually happening, as basically inherently extremist or a threat to law enforcement. And so this was released, was leaked, and then they supposedly ended it, but we know that it's constantly ongoing, that this is a legacy of and a continuation of FBI's programs like COINTELPRO, which surveilled and criminalized Black liberation movements. Here are some examples of behaviors deemed suspicious under these programs. We have, some things that are very typical of youth, for example, acting defiant or expressing your culture, political organizing, etc. And here's from FBI's Preventing Violent Extremism Guidelines, which was specifically targeted at K through 12. So again, stuff that's very typical of all youth, and then when it comes to things like being in poverty, you see very clearly that it's a continuing, it's just criminalization. Finally, the last thing is that we're talking about the expansion of these narratives to also include the pre-existing war on gangs narrative, and basically now combining the war on gangs and the war on terror. So you see, for example, slides that like compare so-called terrorists in Afghanistan to gang members in LA as basically very similar threats. So let me, give me 1 second, just for the sake of time. So our campaign right here is fighting against all of these programs. And we're going to quickly transition to, okay, so basically, I'm going to say before Underground Scholars starts, that if you would be interested in continuing to join our efforts, that we're actually having a working meeting. We're going to drop this multiple times throughout the meeting. Our working meeting next Wednesday, so a week after tomorrow. And please message one of the hosts, message Celine, Nadia, or me in the chat with your contact information if you'd like to attend. It's next Wednesday at 6 p.m. One of the things we're going to be doing is we're going to be filing public records requests to try to find out more information about CVE programs that are being launched in LA or are ongoing. And yeah, so send it privately to Nadia, Celine, or me, your contact information if you're interested in attending the working meeting next Wednesday. And then with that, I'm going to pin the guests from Underground Scholars. Give me 1 second. Really quickly, is Jay Javier?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Okay, welcome to you two. Welcome Erica and Javier from Underground Scholars. First, could you two just introduce yourselves and the organization a little bit?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. Hello, everyone. My name is Javier Rodriguez. I'm one of the co-founders of Underground Scholars Initiative. And pretty much to share a little bit myself, born and raised in Los Angeles, formerly incarcerated, definitely engaged with drug addictions, housing insecurity, especially the environment that we grew up in a violent place, I would say. So having been through that, I was able to pretty much transition over and transfer into UCLA and attain both my bachelor's and my master's degree at that time. And during that time, I pretty much gravitated towards people, which, as you can imagine, there's not many of us that shared the same background. So the few that did, we were able to gravitate towards each other and essentially start an organization that represented formerly incarcerated students. So we ended up getting connected with Underground Scholars in Berkeley, and I can share a little bit more of the history of Underground Scholars. So Underground Scholars started in Berkeley in 2013 by two lifers, Danny Murillo and Steven Cifra, and a group of others as well, which they had their own organization up there. And during that time, they were able to pretty much extend and reach out to us when we were pretty much starting on the same. Well, we started very similar of a student organization, just coming together in 2015. So we ended up starting our org as well. And at UCLA, as you can imagine, we faced a lot of resistance in regards just to be able to establish Underground Scholars. Underground Scholars is essentially an organization that is creating a pathway from incarceration into higher education. And we labeled or token the word the pretty much prison to university pipeline. And that has been really our mission, is about how can we continue to change the narrative from the institutional level about people that have been criminalized by the system, and be able to reflect, not only our accomplishments, but our abilities to succeed in these institutions, and destigmatize what a person who has been convicted of, which a lot of times society tends to like dispose of. So with that said, we definitely, as you can imagine, in a conservative institution, we face a lot of resistance in engaging in that kind of narrative on campus, when the institution itself, as you can imagine, always has pointed to people like us as the problem and never really looking at themselves or at the system as the problem that's causing all these issues. So that's a real quick snippet. We can dive into more, but I want to definitely give space to Erica to jump in and share a few words.
Yeah, thanks Javier for starting it off. I'm actually not part of Underground Scholars. I'm not systems impacted or formerly incarcerated. I'm just Javier's buddy. But no, I before I went to UCLA with Javier, I worked for this organization that did a lot of policy and administrative state level advocacy to try to redirect state budgetary funding away from probation and law enforcement into community-based programs and directly to community-based organizations. And my old workplace and the Berkeley Underground Scholars got connected around trying to stop this kind of new youth prison that Scott Budnick was pushing for a few years ago. So, through those kind of relationships, I ultimately met Javier when we were both going to graduate school at UCLA. And I don't actually remember how we, started doing stuff together, but we're just kind of friends and believe in a lot of the same things. And I think at the time that we were at the Luskin School of Public Affairs specifically, both got really wrapped up in how the extent to which the academy was sort of built to stigmatize and silence voices, that it wasn't really ever created to support, I guess. So we both got really into like on campus kind of administrative organizing in that way. We've worked together a lot since.
Awesome, thank you both. And for context for everyone, the one of the reasons that we're featuring Javier and Erica is because of their amazing work in generating support against basically, that's a weird way of saying it, but basically generating energy and opposition among the UCLA community to UCLA's collaboration with the LAPD on a program called the Community Safety Partnership. And the Community Safety Partnership program goes back about a decade, but it's also very much topical and present right now because the LAPD recently announced the creation of a Community Safety Partnership Bureau that they bill as kind of a response to the outcry against police murders. And the Community Safety Partnership Program, which we're going to be getting into, has a lot of similarities with CVE in that it actually seems at the outset like it's an alternative to policing, or that it's more police doing programs, or that it's but we're actually trying to get people to understand this is a surveillance counterinsurgency program that's designed to target and criminalize people. And actually the Community Safety Partnership Program has a really deep connection to the gang narrative. So with that, I would like to ask you can you talk a little bit about what was, can you tell us a little bit about more about the Community Safety Partnership Program and what was UCLA's specific role in that. Could you tell us about, and then a little bit about UCLA Luskin as well, so we can understand, because I know there's the term Luskin gets used a lot because there's a lot of different things named after him. So what was the specific role that UCLA had in the Community Safety Partnership Program?
Yeah, sure. I can start, Javier, and you can fill in if I miss anything. So when we refer to Luskin, we're referring specifically to a graduate program called the Luskin School of Public Affairs that includes 3 graduate program and 1 kind of undergraduate program. So it's includes people studying to be Masters of Social Welfare, Public Policy, and Urban Planning. And so the kind of mission, I guess, of the graduate school is to study public policy, make policy recommendations to government agencies, or I don't know, sometimes it's like the philanthropic wing of a private organization, train social workers, train urban planners. There probably is more. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about Luskin, and we're just kind of broadly referring to the leadership of that school and the professors and the kind of bureaucracy of it. And so we both went there. So Javi got his master's in social work and I got my master's in public policy. So we can kind of only speak to when we started to get involved. I'm not sure what kind of exactly the history of Luskin's involvement with the community safety partnerships are, but last March, so March 2020, they published an evaluation of the community safety partnership program. And that's kind of the thing that drew us into it, and we read it and didn't like it very much. So it seems like, and I think actually maybe Akil and Hamid, you could probably fill in more blanks here, but it seems like something that various professors at Luskin have been kind of involved in peripherally in some way in Watts, and trying to, with the goal of improving kind of relations between police and residents of Watts, trying to find, I don't know, some sort of way to use policing to, and then I guess this is the kind of problem I'm not sure if I could verbalize what the goal of the program is precisely, but I don't know, generally the goal seems to be like decreasing violence in Watts through the use of police programs. So I don't really know the details of that, but eventually in March, they published this evaluation of that program. And that's kind of where we stepped in and actually, I don't know, had some more concrete documentation to read about exactly what CSPs were. Does that answer the question, Akil?
Yeah, and for clarification for people, the evaluation was really glowing. It was saying that, UCLA says the program is great, and LAPD went and used this academic paper as sort of a justification. It cited it as basically, evidence of the success of the program. And we'll get into more of the critiques about why we don't think the evidence is convincing. But could you two first talk a little bit about the 2 sort of names of interest in terms of the authors? We have Georgia Leap and Jeff Brantingham, 2 names that we want people who are in this meeting to remember because they are involved in other ways too. So Javier and Erica, could you tell us a little bit about those 2 and their complicated history, to put it politely.
I can jump in and start. I have I guess, a complicated relationship with Georgia myself. So, as I mentioned, I was an undergrad at UCLA, and um, and the institution itself is very conservative, right? And I'll share one quick story, not to sidetrack too much, but one of the co-founders ended up passing away, and it took me 2 years to get his posthumous degree. He was short by a few units. I literally had to go get senators and assembly members and faculty that I knew that, were for the cause to really push to change policy. And it took us 2 years to make this happen, just to share how difficult it is to even make a slight change of someone who deserves a degree, and convincing UCLA to do the right thing there. It's so funny too. UCLA emailed me 2 years later on Christmas telling me that they gave me the degree. Ironic, like if it was a Christmas present. Just to give you insight of UCLA's mentality of, they give things to us, or, they do things out of the heart. But anyways, going back to the relationship with Georgia. So I ended up working. So I grew up in Watts. So I ended up working with Georgia Leap as an undergrad because she was in Watts, and I wanted to give back to my community. So I worked with her in Project Fatherhood. She helped me get into, I would say, right, she advocated for me to get into the MSW program. But during my time in the MSW program, I really noticed how Georgia would use, or pretty much manipulate, my narrative, right, of like how she pulled me out the hood and made me a successful person, the white savior complex of well, she had no clue I was even in the hood. I just ended up taking her class, but that ended up being the narrative. So when I started advocating within the institution, she pretty much ostracized me for it due to what can I say, just my unwillingness to accept injustice, right? To accept how they would exploit identities on campus. So essentially, I already kind of had a bad feel for Georgia at that point when I kind of started seeing what she really stood for. So when this report came across, I knew that Georgia Leap was doing something similar again, right? Exploiting our community for her gain and for an agenda that was hidden, that wasn't always necessarily in the forefront. But as someone who dealt with her personally and seeing how she personally treated me after I refused to allow myself to be exploited, just showed me that it was very similar. I think as me and Erica vetted the community, I was plugged in, so I was able to talk to folks in the community. We found someone who, and I thought just said it best, the report itself is really a reflection of nothing but pro-police people there who, right, is a lot of it is fear that is really installed in the community of why we need the police. And all the people that were not for that report essentially were left out. So when you do that, right, selective research, then of course you're going to have a report that says the community wants this. Right, when they were able to really silence the people that didn't and create this narrative that the community of Watts feel this is right, something that we want as a community. So that's just a quick snippet of like Georgia.
Thank you. And I think that I can also quickly just note that when it comes to Brantingham, one of the other key authors, that this is a UCLA anthropology professor who has brought in huge amounts of money to UCLA in grants from the federal government, and basically used that money and in-kind exchanges with the LAPD, where the LAPD gave him crime data, historic crime data, to create and to collaborate with the LAPD on a predictive policing algorithm called PredPol, which he also based off of his research of studying basically resistance to US occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. And this PredPol algorithm, which is a racist predictive policing tool, was used by the LAPD until we were able to shut it down in disgrace. And it's still a corporation that is selling its tool to police departments all over the country and even in other countries. Like there was a period of time where I think it was Kent in England that was using PredPol. So Brantingham is another very key person that we're looking at. And I know that currently he's doing a lot of research into GRID, the Gang Reduction Youth Development part of the program, and how that can be a tool to quote unquote, fight gangs. And that's a very key part of the Community Safety Partnership Program as well, which we'll be talking about in upcoming meetings. Another thing that the Community Safety Partnership Program involves is the Neighborhood Watch, in which people are basically being cultivated as informants, and also kind of this idea of rubber stamping, the idea, as Javier was saying, that the community wants police. So that's something that we see in common with CVE, where a big emphasis is on building trust between law enforcement and police, and law enforcement and communities, and sort of this idea that that's the basically rubber stamping police being in that community. So with that, could you talk a little bit about the letter that you two drafted with us, and then the process for getting signatures, and what were the key points in the letter? This is a letter to the Dean of UCLA Luskin.
Yeah, so I guess our letter, it kind of details our problems with the evaluation itself, and then our problems with CSP as told by the evaluation. So I guess I could start off by pointing out who funded the CSP evaluation. And to go back to Akil's point that this evaluation overall, the recommendations in it are all very supportive. They're all like, we should increase funding to this program. This program is doing great stuff. It's lowering crime. It's successful, like the community likes it. And, the evaluation itself is actually a little bit more measured, like the findings within, especially the qualitative interviews with the residents. There's a lot bigger of a range of concerns that get raised for those recommendations to be the ultimate takeaways of the evaluation. So to Javier's point, that a lot of people that we later followed up with who are vehemently opposed to CSPs, their quotes aren't really pulled out in this evaluation at all, and their point of view isn't part of the presentation of this program. But even without them, there's still a lot of negative things like within the evaluation itself. So even as a document, as a study, it kind of doesn't make sense. Like, why aren't you addressing all these concerns that you yourself raised in this evaluation? So
yeah, I think another huge population is the youth that were left out. The youth that is a huge population we did not participate in that.
Yes, for sure. So I can kind of walk through some of the issues that we raised in our letter. And one of the first things is who funded the study. So a lot of these names come up all the time. And I think that's kind of like the defense that gets used for studies like this, is that, I mean, like, they have money and they fund everything. But we should start looking deeper, because the Weingart Foundation, which is a big philanthropic nonprofit in LA, funded this study. And one of the board members is Steve Soboroff, who's on the police commission, and has always been very pro LAPD and getting them basically the resources that they desire. So that's a red flag. And then Akil or Hamid, I don't know if you maybe can give more details on this, but the Ballmer Group, so Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft, also invested not only for this study, funding into this study, but directly contributed funds to CSP. So kind of seems has a vested interest in their success. And then we learned from Stop LAPD Spying, Microsoft provides a lot of the actual equipment used for community surveillance. So they have some pretty steep contracts with LAPD that I'm sure they want to see continue. I'm sure they're very lucrative. And then there's an anonymous donor, which given the character of the other donors just raises red flags, and it seems like something that shouldn't really necessarily be allowed in a evaluation for a taxpayer policing program. And then the other two funders are kind of luxury development companies. And while there's no kind of clear connection in the same way that there are with Ballmer and Weingart, I mean, it's just sort of a well-documented story that developers have an interest in banishing residents who they find undesirable. So there's a pretty clear connection between over-policing for the sake of, clearing out original residents so that properties can be bought and like high rises can be built. And so we kind of feel like why, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense like why these organizations would be funding a study like this. So that's the funding piece. Javier, did you want to add anything?
No, I thought you covered it all.
Hey. I'll try to watch the chat too.
And then in regards to the actual content of the paper as well. So
Right.
there's the piece that they left out, they didn't consult with youth. And then there's also the Brantingham section and the quantitative, supposedly scientific support for the program.
Right. And I actually followed up with some people after we sent this letter in to try to, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm like a masters of statistics in any way. So we were kind of seeking out some other opinions about like the soundness of the quantitative methods in this paper. And someone I reached out to basically said like the task that they set out for themselves, which is what they're seeking to do is prove that the implementation of CSPs in two neighborhoods in Watts decreased crime in those two neighborhoods. But he was telling me that it's kind of an impossible task that they've set out for themselves because the kind of treatment variable is so small, and it's really hard to disconnect the like experimental group from the control group. And basically said they did the best they can, but it's like not really feasible. Which I thought was a pretty like fair thing to say. Like they employed some rigorous methods, but it's just not like something that the claim in this evaluation is that they make some very like hard claims like CSPs decrease murders by 200. And those are very misleading statements given the kind of challenges and obstacles in the way of doing a quantitative study.
Thank you for that. And we have a question from the chat, which is from Dr. Chowdhury, who asks, is there a longer history / context for these kinds of collaborations between UCLA and police security agencies? And has there been resistance against these in the past that helps with strategies and organizing today? Or is this qualitatively new? And I was wondering if you two could touch a little bit about, the fight against Brantingham, as well as what we saw with Jackie Robinson. Stadium. And then we have to finish up in just a couple minutes. So I also would love if you could also talk a little bit about gathering signatures and this impressive range of signatures we were able to gather. So could you, yeah, those two things too. Yeah. What is the connection of this to UCLA's complicity before this, as well as what was your process of gathering signatures and who were some of the people you were able to get to sign?
Sure.
Well, I'll go into the policing. What, as I mentioned, just UCLA is a conservative institution, and I think that just really reflects on right. You think any conservative person or any conservative agency, they're always going to lean on police, law enforcement. So UCLA, essentially, Jackie Robinson incident, or when we think about the George Floyd incident that happened nationwide, there was actually huge backlash within UCLA and all the UCs and even the Cal States now, where there's just a huge movement of a cops off campus coalition, which pretty much started because of Jackie Robinson and the way UCLA denied all claims that they were working with them. And then LAPD came out and mentioned that UCLA approved it. So there was a lot of deception happening towards faculty and students on campus by administration. And this essentially pretty much started folks to hold these institutions accountable. Now there's a huge push for that. I think a big push for, obviously, from the higher academia, you think about LACCD cutting their contract with the sheriff's department. I feel like that may create a huge momentum in getting cops off campus. And essentially, before I left, there was a policy that essentially ended up passing by UCLA, which showed that they were pretty much believed in hypervigilance when they passed the policy. And I forget the name of the policy, I think UCLA 20, that pretty much gives all the control to the police department. All the cameras will be centralized now. So it would be like CCTV, where UCLA essentially, you would think, would operate as an open society, or students would have the privacy. Now, pretty much they passed a policy, and really the students couldn't do nothing about it. We tried hard to fight it, and there was no way. Just due to us students having to leave too fast, quarter system, it just really got heavy on when I think about just the organizing that happened. But yeah, essentially UCLA showed the year before that they were pro-police, and that left me a bad taste in my mouth to really think how you would think a university of that nature and that magnitude would be in the forefront of demonstrating that we don't need police. Yet that was a complete opposite. UCLA was all about making sure they can get vigilance on every corner on campus. So now we managed, I think we counted all the cameras. I feel like UCPD has more access to cameras than LAPD. And it was nuts. It was insane to really see that. And that just kind of showed us as a student body where UCLA pretty much hangs their hat on, creating fear and then wanting to just police everything. So just to kind of share that, and that, so we'll see if the movement happens and continues to push forward. As you can imagine, there's huge momentum, but it takes years to really be able to make change there. But I'll pass it on to.
Yeah, we definitely need to at least quickly hear about like the broad range of people that you had sign the letter and the response from Luskin. And then if you could also just close with what's one thing that people listening can do to support underground scholars as well.
Yeah, so we got about 600 signatures to this letter. And to Javier's point, I think that students and faculty have been seeing how UCLA relies on policing and, arresting students protesting George Floyd's murder at Jackie Brown Stadium. But then, even before that, it was a pretty well-known fact that UCPD profiles students of color based on their arrest records. And Westwood, where UCLA is a very wealthy area, and that community is very kind of anti-student and relies on policing as well. So I think all those experiences have created like a lot of frustration among the student body and the faculty. And so it was, and we sent this letter out in October, like well after the incident at Jackie Robinson. So there was a lot of anger, and it was, you know, people were like looking for something to kind of address the complicity of the university in the expansion of the role of policing, I think. So we got a lot of sign-ons from a lot of students at Luskin because they kind of understand the culture of the graduate school, a lot of faculty, a lot of community-based orgs who Luskin often purports to work with. Something like a huge weakness of Luskin as a policy graduate school is of partnering with the community and community activists and kind of validating what the movement building work has been doing for decades, long before they come along and kind of validate it with in the eyes of formal policymakers. So it wasn't a challenge to get signatures at all, because I think people were mad, but the school, and we sent our letter to the school, and the school never really directly responded to us, but we were forwarded an email that the dean sent to the staff and faculty of Luskin, who signed on to the letter, basically stating that if you want, like, the choices of topic study of the faculty shouldn't be attacked, and they're kind of allowed to study whatever they want. And if you feel so strongly about it, like, write your own study, is kind of what I would boil that message down to, which is so frustrating because obviously, if anyone should know, they should know how long it takes to do a study that, you know, gets published and is received by, you know, academia and whatever. So that's just like such an unreasonable ask to make of not only professors, but of community members of the place that they're studying, raising issues with a program that affects them and nobody at Luskin. So that was just very insulting. And I think that, you know, they're kind of hiding behind the myth of objectivity when they should very well know at this point that, like, it doesn't really matter what your study says. Like, the minute LAPD or the city has a study from UCLA, they're going to employ it to support whatever their goal is in the first place. So he's being sort of willfully naive. For what purpose, I'm not sure.
So thank you so much, both Javier and Erica. If you do have some call to action or something that you could share with the community, you can either post in the chat or you can say it out loud right now. And can I just post the letter in the chat, the Google Doc, for people to check out as well? It's a public document, right? Or is it not?
We had to take down the link, but yeah, it's a public document. I don't really know where it lives these days, but yeah, feel free to post.
I have it. Okay, so we're going to be transitioning to the next topic. So thank you, everybody, for thank you, Erica and Javier. And I'm going to pin the next people, and like, yeah, post in the chat if how people can get in touch with the undergrad scholars. Okay.
Hey y'all, if you joined, my name's Nadia. Thank you all for being here as well, underground scholars, really appreciate it. And so just wanted to transition, before we transition to the next part, wanted to just, for the folks who joined a little more recently, wanted to invite folks to our working meeting if you'd like to support the fight on the war on youth. Our next working meeting where we kind of dig deeper and work on various things is going to be January 20th at 6 p.m. I'll just post this in the chat as well. You know, you can just message one of myself or Akil or Celine, and there's also a little link in there to fill out a Google form. So just wanted to put that out there. Yes, and thank you for posting the letter as well, Akil. So kind of the next thing we wanted to move into, which we know UCLA and various various universities and academia in general has also played a major role in is really these terms around domestic terrorism, violent extremism, and that's really some of the core of what our fight is about, is how those words are used to target and criminalize our communities. And so we wanted to have this conversation today because one thing we've really been seeing is how the fight, in what the state claims the fight against violent extremism, as they've been called out for it being very racist, they've been shifting the language to now say, okay, well, fine, we're going to go after white violent extremists, in this Trump era, as that has been increasing. And this is something we've been pushing against because we know in the end, it's who is it going to fall on, right? It's communities of color. And so we wanted to have that conversation given the recent, what's recently happened at the Capitol, with the Trump supporters going into the Capitol, and now this language of domestic terrorism and, and right-wing violent extremism, now that language being used and how that impacts us. And so before we go into, we're gonna have actually a couple folks from Stop LAPD Spying talking about this with us. But I wanted to put out a question. Actually to you all, to everyone in the meeting, and that is just a simple question. What comes to mind when you hear terrorism? So two questions I'm going to ask. One is, what comes to mind when you hear terrorism, and also the word extremism, and then how has the government, the state and the government, used these terms, domestic terrorism, violent extremism? So just wanted to see if anyone wants to unmute and share that, or if you want to go ahead and put it in the chat. So I'll put those questions. Oh, thank you, Akil. And yeah, and Akil, feel free to put the second one as well. That way folks want to, because it's interesting, right? What we think of it versus how the state uses it, and then how that interacts. So yeah, okay, I see Andrew has shared. And again, feel free if you want to do the raise hand, if you'd like to speak on that as well. Just to kind of get our brains a little warmed up in thinking about this. So Andrew says 500 years of white terrorism from colonialism to the present. All right, yes. And yeah, and that's something we talk a lot about, is then how, and even at the coalition, we're like, well, what do we call that then, right? If using the word terrorism feeds into narratives. So, okay, see some more responses coming in. The word terrorism is inseparable from 9/11 in my mind. Definitely hear you on that. State violence, imperialist war, utilizing the language of terrorism to justify criminalization, surveillance, and policing of our communities, expansion of the war on terror. All right, see that terrorism as a cop word. Okay. Then, okay, then Akil says, for the government, terrorism is inherently un-American, which is why they have to qualify it to say domestic terrorism. Okay, I hear you, Akil. Yeah, and any more thoughts? And really with these two questions, right, the reason they interact, and this is where we kind of have to think about it. So knowing what we really see as violence and terror, but then also knowing how that word gets flipped on us, right? Any other thoughts around that? Okay, terrorism as an alibi to not to understand the political or social cause. Yeah, so feel free to keep kind of putting your thoughts in there about that, just to kind of keep us moving as well. And again, the chat is open, so you're welcome to continue to put your thoughts around those two questions. Wanted to quickly give the chance to our folks from Stop LAPD Spying just to quickly introduce yourselves. We have Hamid, Shakir, Jojo, and Chela. So if you want to just quickly introduce yourselves, and then we can go into just a couple of the questions we have to help us unwrap this. So yeah, so we'll go with maybe Hamid, Chela, Shakir, and then Jojo.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hamid, he, him, at Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Chella. My pronouns are she and they. I'm with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition.
Thank you, Chella.
Yeah, hey, I'm Shakir on I use he, they, and yeah, also with Stop WP Spying.
Thank you.
Hey folks, the name is Jojo, she, her, Aya, part of Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and also happy to be here.
Nice, thank you all. So for the first question, kind of be, I guess, kind of a combined question. How, and we'll put in the chat as well, how has the term domestic terrorism historically been used to criminalize communities? And how does using that term to target white supremacists actually hurt communities of color? So I know maybe Shakir and anybody else want to add on to that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, part of I think the answer is stuff that people have been saying in the chat, which is when you use that word and that term in the context of our country and our government, you're using it within a society that's always going to be any apparatus of national security, any apparatus of criminalizing terrorism or targeting anyone will always be used against people who that apparatus has always targeted. So anytime you're transferring kind of any power or any just idea that or even rallying behind those tools as the response, that's going to be creating power for that to be used against people who are in other broader and broader ways designated kind of enemies of the state or threats to security or insurgency. A lot of the terminology that we're seeing used for the Trump supporters at the Capitol are also terminology that we regularly see used, you know, for abolitionists, for organizers, for revolutionaries, and other causes. And you know, so that's kind of one way to think about it. And it's also, it's not just theoretical. I mean, even the way that the kind of national security state has expanded over time has always been based on identifying things like this from all kinds of political angles, and then creating tools that are then used to hunt and harm the people that the system always harms. Like after the Oklahoma City bombing attacks, right then, in 1996, right after the attacks, the Congress passed a series of laws signed by Bill Clinton that you know, one was the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, which basically made it a lot harder for prisoners to challenge their convictions and enforce their rights in court. The other was the Prisoner Litigation Reform Act, also made it harder for prisoners to challenge their convictions and challenge their conditions. What did those have to do with Oklahoma City? Pretty much nothing, but it was just a reason where the government realized, okay, we can kind of unite some bipartisan support behind something that we always want to do. It's a way for everyone to kind of, yeah, just unite behind the flag and eventually go after the people that they're going to go after. So I think we're seeing, you know, we have to be watching out for that now.
Yeah, Hamid, Jojo, Chella, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a, and before I just go there, I just wanted to quickly, you know, just go back to an earlier conversation about, you know, UCLA's complicity in other places as well. That I just wanted to remind us that while many a times we look at programmatic stuff and the production of tools of harm and all of that, but I think UCLA has always facilitated harm to a lot of people. UCLA has accommodated and facilitated harm. So, for example, I guess it was in, yeah, if I'm not thinking wrong, it was in January, right around, yeah, this time when both Bunchy Carter and John Huggins were murdered, Black Panthers. On campus, where John Huggins, you know, the FBI COINTELPRO was, so this happened in 1969 or 1970. So, and similarly, what we saw, like how these campuses facilitate other persecution as well. For example, the LA8, the Palestinian liberation movement, and folks who have been involved both at Cal State Long Beach and UCLA. So in a sense, broadening the understanding of the role of the academy, not just as providing the tools of harm, but actively facilitating the space for harm as well. And now one of the biggest, challenges or the assault is on Palestinian student organizing, like, how in so many different ways the BDS movement, both from this connection between the academy and Congress and other places as well. So I just wanted to, sorry to take that time, just wanted to throw that in there for us to sort of expand, our sort of understanding as well, and not limit to that. And I think, when we look at the history of domestic terrorism, and yeah, this has been used for many, many years, particularly, when we go back, and when we start mapping out some of that stuff, it has, most of the time, this has been on movements for liberation. So even like, not going back to the work that we do, and we talk about the Red Squads after in 1888, this was in the aftermath of 1886 Haymarket strikes, which really led to the creation of 8-hour workday. So this was banned because people were deemed as anarchists, but people were fighting from just incredibly draconian workplace conditions, fighting for 8-hour workday. So that happened as well. I mean, how the civil rights movement and Black liberation movements were framed as domestic terrorists. Other Puerto Rican liberation movement was seen as domestic terrorists. The American Indian movement was framed as. So in a sense, whenever we look at this, and then of course, the other times it has been used as well as around the anti-abortion movement as well, where acts of terrorism have been done around abortion providing doctors and this, that, and the other, but then the animal liberation front. So when you look at overall that and looking at it through current moment, that while yes, there has been some history around and bringing it to the current moment again, that has been a history of where, particularly, the as we would call in mainstream politics as right-wing politics or conservative movements, there has been some targeting, but overwhelmingly it has been around liberation movements, overwhelmingly, and so I think that's why it is. And now terrorism has taken on a more codified word, particularly since the 1980s and around Reagan's time, around the jihadist and the Muslims. So terrorist is a codified word for a Muslim now. So I think we just have to be very careful when we demand for these things and label people like that it's going to come back to haunt us. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Chella or Jojo, anything to add to that?
I think Hamid captured that well. Yeah, it's like who controls the narrative, who gets to label people terrorists, who carries out the violence, who has perpetrated or who has, engaged in violent acts that create the conditions for people to have to fight for their lives. And when that happens, you're creating a situation where, well, and that's the thing about it, right? Like the fact that the state gets to determine what violence is a key part in this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Jojo. Chella, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, Hamid said it all, and so did Jojo. That was amazing. I also love, just thinking around, yeah, never mind. I think what they said was brilliant.
Cool. Thank you, Chella. So just kind of, which it was stated, wanted to, before we go into talking about how to really fight and push back against this, I wanted to bring an international context as well. So yesterday, right, the Trump administration classified Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism. And it also classified the Houthis resisting the genocidal war, by Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, the UK, and the US against Yemen, right, as terrorists. And so, and I'll post this in the chat too, but what does this say about the role of the language and using this word around terrorism as it pertains to US foreign policy? And then how does this relate to how, you know, the war on terror happens at home? And also thanks folks, I've seen some of folks contributing to the chat. So yes, feel free to keep sharing your thoughts and resources and links on that as well. Thank you. So so kind of given these classifications that recently happened and really the history of that as well, just to repeat the question, what then is the role of this language around terrorism, extremism in US foreign policy, and how does it relate to the you know, the domestic war on terror, the at home, so to speak? And I will copy and paste that. So yeah, feel free if anyone wants to jump in on that one.
I can maybe say just on the Cuba example, I think one thing that is a really clear connection there is, I mean, when the State Department made that designation for Cuba, they specifically cited Cuba harboring kind of terrorists and you know, fugitives from the United States, and specifically we're talking about Assata Shakur. Like that's when Mike Pompeo has been talking about why they're doing that, they keep talking about Assata, and that's, you know, a great example of you know, using that label of terrorism and sponsor of terrorism to be attacking, you know, domestic activists and domestic freedom fighters, you know, and so if you can claim that you know, letting Assata Shakur live in your country means you're harboring terrorists, then that raises the question of what separates that label from those of us who support Assata's freedom and who support her ideas and kind of support those ideals and values. So yeah, that it's very easy to turn these labels around in that way. And that's a good example of the connection between the international and domestic labels.
Yeah. Jojo, Chela, Hamid, anything to add to that? I know that's, I mean, there's so much to say about that, right? So yeah, and anything y'all would like to add. Thank you, Andrew, also for your thoughts as well on that question in the chat.
Just naming the rhetoric around, I mean, I think it was just said, but like also thinking around anyone who goes against white supremacy and goes against racism and fights against that is named a terrorist. Is named, you know, is named something extreme, and it's something to like create fear into the hearts of a white cis woman named Becky, you know. I just think about those things. That's the only thing I can say. Just naming, you know, and Shakira, thank you for saying, you know, naming Assata. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Chel. You know, like white supremacy as the norm, and then any response, right, against it as the extreme. Yeah, I like how you named that. Thank you. Yeah, Hamid, I saw you unmute as well. I didn't know if you had anything to add, or Jojo.
I'll take Jojo's lead. I'll wait.
Oh, thank you. I think the word rhetoric also came to my mind, and thinking about the way that language is like pushed through media. And if you say it enough, right, like people will start to fear, or yeah, as Chela was saying, like people will have that seed planted in their mind. And I think that's it's such an important tool that the state uses to control, I guess, the narrative and continue to hold on to that power.
Yeah, I was just gonna, you know, there's a romanticized version of this thing where, you know, the old saying that one person's revolutionary is another person's terrorist. This is something that has been framed for so long. And, I just saw Nelson Mandela's name pop up in chat. So, whether Nelson Mandela was a terrorist or revolutionary or was involved in liberation movements, depends who you talk to. But I think in the context of the United States, we have to look at it through its ideological framework before anything gets examined. So when you look at a settler colonial, capitalist, white supremacist, patriarchal state, whose roots are in European Christian Zionism and expanding, so I think everything is going to be looked through this very deep lens of like, who is the enemy of the state? And what makes them the enemy of the state as well, and to what extent are they enemy of the state. So obviously, just starting off immediately, the indigenous and the black body, historically speaking, the enemy of this ideology, the enemy of settler colonialism, the enemy of unfettered profit, the enemy of slave labor, the enemy of just trying to preserve the way of life and preserve land. So I think when we look at it through that historical lens, as we said, the coalition, there's always another. There's always been another. So now in those partnerships as a settler colonial state, and we have to really just expand our understanding that it's not the geographical regions that the United States is a settler colonial state. Politically, it's a settler colonial state on a global level, because of whether it is in person in control of land or not, but through economic strangulation, through waging war, through other forms of just sabotaging people's economies and countries. This is, I would say, is a global settler colonial state. So in a sense, wherever there's a threat to that, and when you bring in Israel into the equation, and then when we bring in India now increasingly into the equation, we're looking at this mass expansion of who the threat to the system are going to be, because obviously what the Houthis are doing, and it's really it's one of the most saddest moment for all of us, because Yemen is really known as outside of Central Africa. Just Yemen is known in Arabia as the central cradle of so much that has come out of Yemen. I mean, as Aden or Aden, as we would say growing up, is in the imagination. So Palestine and Aden and Yemen, these are places that are just anyways. I mean, much to be said about that. So I think, in a sense, how the demonization of land and people on it happens, and then so now it's a direct in conflict with what their partnership in this cruel system and this kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, who are basically puppet regimes and client states of the United States, and increasingly of Israel as well. So a threat to them would be a threat to a system right here in Washington, D.C. So that's what I would say, that the claim to name them as terrorist states.
Yeah, thank you all for really sharing a lot around that, and also to some of the comments in the chat. I see from Dr. Chaudhry as well, and from Andrew. So yeah, thank you all for your thoughts on that. And so just probably wrap up in about 7-8 minutes. Just a heads up, after this, we're actually going to be finishing the meeting with talking to the Save Arab American Studies and their fight around that. So yeah, just a couple more questions for you all, for the folks here at the coalition. So what do you think would be the similarities and differences between the Biden and Trump administration when it comes to their approaches on domestic terrorism, right? Of course, knowing the fact that a lot of the rhetoric around violent extremism really was propelled by, under Obama, under Democrat. So what do you think will be some of the similarities and differences between Biden and Trump around domestic terrorism? And what do you think will be some strategies that the stalker state, the national security police state, will take in the upcoming year? And I'll go ahead and post that question in the chat as well. So feel free, any of our 4 folks. to answer that. And of course, if folks want to put their thoughts in the chat too. And I just put the question in the chat again also.
I think it's going to be this ultra liberal PC situation with the government right now, especially with Biden and Kamala Harris. I don't think it's going to be as upfront as Trump was, but those things were already there, right? Like Trump was just a mirror of like the government really thinks of Muslims and what it's really thought about Blacks and folks who are defending their own lives against against land taking, against them taking land and land sovereignty and all those things that we need to fight for. I do not think it's going to be the same rhetoric. It'll be coded a lot more, but it's still going to have the same effects, especially with like a bunch of white liberals echoing those things, right? A lot of people think that Biden and Kamala, I'm trying to make myself laugh through that. A lot of people think that that's that's improvement, but it's not. We have to challenge white supremacy. We have to challenge Islamophobia and antagonism. We have to challenge anti-Indigenous and anti-Black rhetoric and anti-trans rhetoric, and so like I think the way we actually have to we're still going to have to challenge them. It just I think it won't be the same, it'll just be more covert. That's what I think.
Thank you, Chela. Yeah, Shakir, Jojo, Hamid, anything to add to that?
Yeah, maybe to jump on and add to something that Chela said is like, yeah, at the same time that we'll have to be challenging this stuff and challenging it more aggressively, probably, you have a lot of the kind of critics of the Trump administration, kind of a lot of people who are at all these organizations and stuff that were challenging the Trump administration now entering government and entering kind of becoming reformers within the government and becoming part of, the Department of Justice and all of that. So I think what that means is what we'll see is an effort for the stuff that the Biden administration is doing is really kind of cloaking it in the language of kind of legality and reform and, creating kind of, memos about it and stuff like that. Like, the construction and expansion of the whole drone program was done not really illegally, but like very much through all these memos and legality and trying to do it through, trying to basically create like a sanitized, like a legal form of war through it. And so I think we'll be seeing a lot of that, whereas the Trump administration was either in practice, trying, just like doing things without really caring about how they looked or what, how they were on paper, or just trying to do things and just kind of being incompetent about them. You're going to see with, I think the Biden administration, a lot more like creating the legal precedents and tools and kind of mechanisms to make this stuff really last and endure because, they're writing it into the laws and creating laws that'll remain on the books for a long time.
Thank you. Hamid, Jojo, anything to add to that?
There's two comments that I think they hit what I was thinking. The respectability politics during the Biden administration. The fact that, it's something that people are I think that it creates a division within our community as well. Right? Like when there is a liberal administration, people tend to take a hands-off approach and just say, well, at least it's not Trump. But left and right, it's the same bird, right? Like left wing, right wing, it's the same bird. And so I think that it's, that there's a danger to that. And then also the other comment about putting like historically mapping out what the Democrats have done and what the Republicans have done. I think that's a really good suggestion.
Yeah, I just wanted to real quickly, actually, it's interesting that we are in this moment as well. I just wanted to go back in April 2020 or May 2020 when we released that first zine, and not a moment in time. And the zine was really, I mean, it just that we started these webinars with our opening paragraph being that it's in time of these crises that the national security police state expands, that the national security police state then basically gets more weapons and all of that. So in this, we also, and I posted the link to the zine as well, where people can download both the online version and the printable version as well, that these were just some of the things that we talked about, like, Save Street Acts of 1968, which was in result of liberal outrage about Southern states attacking civil rights demonstrations. Well, this is almost like, remember that? It's happening like it could be happening yesterday. So what happened was more heavy police militarization, more things, 1984 Olympics. Then we saw Operation Hammer. Then we saw, as a result, like, gangs, crimes, what is happening in LA, the 1994 crime bill. And then following Oklahoma City bombing, the Effective Death Penalty Anti-Terrorism Act. So, and then also we saw the immigration, the IRA bill as well in 96. We also saw the Welfare Reform Act in 96 as well. And then, of course, the 9/11 attacks. We saw Patriot Act and various other Real ID Act, and then CVE and PVE and all of these things. I think the question really for us is that, when it comes to Biden or Trump, I mean, Biden and Kamala are both cops. I mean, they basically, that's who they are. I mean, Kamala Harris has built her political career as a DA, as just a prosecutor, as a DA, as an attorney general, and is very much wedded to what we at the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition constantly fight about: high-tech surveillance, risk assessment tools, algorithms, predictive analytics, very much into, like, pushing for these kind of tools as well. So they have already announced that they're going to fund $300 million more to the COPS office, which we were talking about, the CSP program, which directly is funded from the COPS office as well. So I think to expect anything different, and I think Chela is right on, that it's going to be masked quite a bit. And I think, and sometimes, you just kind of have this funny feeling in your stomach where you're like, oh shit, some of us who've lived through that we're having a Bill Clinton moment in January 1993, where everybody was so happy, all the liberals were dancing in the street, and next thing you know, we got what we got. So I think but at the end of the day, it really comes down to us. What is our fight? Well, how vigilant are we? Are we not getting into this romanticized version, or this, of like, well, gee, I mean, just and we see that happening already. Like, this love fest that is going on, because that love fest is a result of like anything but Trump. Okay, but let's keep an eye open, because where we are headed can be extremely, extremely draconian. And more so, we saw today the passage of facial recognition technology, the policy at the LAPD, even on that level. We are going to see the Super Bowl coming to LA in 2 years. We're going to see the Olympics coming to LA. That all of these things are almost like these storms kind of building, which are going to justify a much more heavy-handed police state. And if anything, I would argue that the police state is going to expand way more than what we know of right now.
Thank you all for sharing that. And you kind of helped us transition into the last part. And if I hate to limit y'all, but if maybe you could answer in like 1 minute each, because definitely want to, there's so much to be said about this. And want to really give that space also for the folks at Save Arab American Studies who will be speaking next. But maybe in 1 minute each, can you all talk about, because we're all about building power, right? So how can we both fight against these terms, right, that the state is using, domestic terrorism, violent extremism, And what would be an actual solution to the problem of white supremacist violence? Of course, knowing that we're on Zoom and being recorded, right? But what, so what are first, what can we do to fight against these terms? And what are actual solutions, that we can do against the white supremacist vigilante violence that has been around and that is continuing to build. I'll post those in the chat. So yeah, if y'all can maybe take 1 minute each to answer that, that would be great.
I'll go first. I'll try to make it quick. I think education, right? I think real education, learning about real movements that fought against tyranny, right? Learning about how different countries fought against, the fight back. I think the fight back is always something I'm like, my ear gravitates toward too, because like people don't want to just hear about the problem, right? Because like they'll get lost in depression, and that's my thing too. So when we hear about the fight back and people who actually won, it's like, oh, Ethiopia were never colonized; they were fought against. Italy, yes, yes. So those kind of things. So I think education and like really having real authentic conversations about liberation and what does liberation really look like, for not just for one but for all.
Thank you, Cello.
I can go next. I think for me, it would be definitely to center the most marginalized amongst us and the most vulnerable, and continue to work to create these strong societies that do make, that do make the state, that do make that eradicate the state, that make sure that we take care of each other, because the state's never gonna take care of us. And so relying on one another to protect each other and to be there for one another, but also not romanticizing the struggle, as Hamid has brought up. Recognizing, sorry, there's like multiple meetings in here, but yeah, recognizing that there's a lot of beautiful people struggling, but there's no beauty in the struggle.
Thank you, Jojo.
Yeah, I agree. The fight back, the struggle, and like also kind of, taking that struggle right to all the things that are driving that power, and taking that power and making sure we're taking power away from the things that are empowering white supremacy. And that includes capitalism, that includes militarism, one of the like biggest manifestations of white supremacy is a military that goes around the world colonizing different countries, and who all of our enemies are obviously people of color, and most of them are Muslim. That's and that also, so many of the white supremacist militias and stuff, that's where they're getting their recruitment from. That's their people coming back from war, and same with police. So yeah, so it's we need to be working to take power away from all of those institutions.
Yeah, I don't know how much more I can add. Just the folks have really beautifully laid it out. I think just all I can add to that is to really just as a community, I think conversations like this, collective learning, how do we keep our situational awareness? How do we keep our 360? How do we remain suited up? And by suited up, it means very many different things, like, in all aspects of where we are, how we are, who we are, and understanding the long trajectory of violence. I mean, I still like to say that we're still in that long wars between the crescent and the cross, and how they play out, and they continue to play out on the daily in so many different ways. So just keeping our ourselves 100, are honest to ourselves and honest to each other. So, but thank you for making the space, though. Appreciate it.
Nice, thank you, Hamid, Shakir, Jojo, Chela, always for knowledge sharing. So really appreciate y'all. Basically for the next 20-25 minutes, then we're gonna be hearing from Celine and Jody. So Celine, I'll pass it to you to talk about the Save Arab American Studies and that fight and how we can support it.
Just real quick, I'm just gonna again talk a little bit about our campaign before we talk about Save Arab American Studies. So just directly in relation to what we just discussed, again, the PYM, our LA chapter and the Stop LAPD Spine Coalition are coordinating a campaign to end these national security surveillance programs and the expansion of the war on terror. And specifically, we're really focused on ending these surveillance programs in schools, including countering violent extremism in schools. And again, that's what Akil was talking about earlier, DHS-initiated counterterrorism program and framework that's being implemented at local, state, federal, and federal levels that is targeting Muslim, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. And we've been in this campaign for years, and we have fought it and beat it at the city level, at the statewide level, and we're also anchors in the National Stop CVE Coalition. So, we just, I think we'll drop the Google form, but if folks want to join that or join our working group meetings to learn more about that campaign and how we can fight these programs as they're being implemented in schools, feel free to fill out the Google form and we'll reach out to you all, invite you to our next working group meeting, which is going to be happening on Wednesday of next week. And yeah, I think I'll pass it to Akil real quick. I think Akil is going to open up a little bit with a little bit about ethnic studies in general before we get into it and introduce Jody as well.
Okay, so first, welcome to Jody and to Celine. Celine, as you know, we're welcome you, even though you're the co-leader of this campaign anyway. But welcome to Jody from Save Arab American Studies and MECA, is that right, as well as your other organizational affiliation, Middle East Children's Alliance. And they're going to be talking to us about a really, really important campaign called Save Arab American Studies, which is part of a larger movement to save ethnic studies, which is under attack in California, as it has been since it started, which it started really quickly, for people who don't know, here in this very state, in the Bay Area, with some historic moments of absolute student and youth power, when a group of students that were calling themselves the Third World Liberation Front were basically fighting against Eurocentric and white supremacist education, and for education that was for and by themselves, as well as for university spaces that really served the communities that they came from and admitted them, etc. And they were really cracked down on hard by the state, including Ronald Reagan and Nixon. And they had guns drawn on them, criminalized everything. And so as a continuation of that, ethnic studies has persevered and expanded, facing all these different challenges, including a ban in Arizona, which included a long list of books that were banned, was overturned later as racist. Basically, Arizona decided Mexican Americans learning about their own histories and cultures and developing ways to resist their own oppression was racist. They decided that was racist rather than the state itself. But luckily that was overturned. And right now what we're facing in California, which we'll hear Jody and Celine talk about, is an assault on ethnic studies and specifically on the inclusion of Arab American studies and the Palestinian liberation movement in that curriculum and BDS, et cetera. So with that, and ethnic studies, they're also going to talk about what their vision is for a truly liberatory ethnic studies campaign too. So passing it over to Celine and Jody now.
Thanks so much, Akil, for the intro. And thank you so much, Jody, for joining us tonight and for talking to us about this campaign. I'm just going to do a really quick overview of what the current campaign is fighting for. And again, as Akil's saying, there's this fight right now at the statewide level because the California Department of Education is attempting to keep Arab American studies either as in the appendix, just trying to push Arab American studies out of the ethnic studies curriculum. And just to give an overview of like how we got to this point, during which the Arab American lesson plan has been relegated to the appendix of the California Model Ethnic Studies curriculum. So over the past few years, numerous educators across the state have worked to put together a statewide ethnic studies curriculum. And as of August of last year, there was an understanding that Arab American studies would be included as part of the Asian American studies in the statewide ethnic studies curriculum. However, the California Department of Education completely failed to live up to that promise, and we found out a couple months ago that it would not be included in any meaningful way and was in fact relegated to the appendix of the curriculum. So in a quick timeline, in August of 2019, there was a series of public comments in relationship to a model curriculum that was developed by majority volunteer ethnic studies educators and practitioners who were tasked by the California Department of Education to develop a curriculum based on Assembly Bill 2016, which would create a curriculum for K through 12 schools across California on ethnic studies. And as part of that curriculum, they included Arab American studies and the rubric of Asian American studies, following a tradition of ethnic studies which is rooted in anti-colonial, anti-racist narratives. However, following that, there of course was right-wing backlash to the curriculum, very specifically also targeting Arab American studies and specifically Palestine. And we know that we cannot have Arab American studies without talking about Palestine. Of course, the struggle for Palestinian liberation was included in these lesson plans. And, you know, this isn't something new, that every time Palestine is brought up in different efforts in the US, like we're gonna face right-wing backlash, we're gonna face Zionist backlash. So there was a attack on the entire curriculum because of the inclusion of the experience of Arab Americans, and the curriculum went through multiple revisions, and the entire curriculum ended up being gutted completely and completely erased of its pedagogy, of its values, and of its principles. So the Save Arab American Studies Coalition, which is led by organizations including AROC, the Arab Resource and Organizing Center in the Bay Area. You've got JVP in the Bay Area. Mecca is a huge part of the coalition. Many in the coalition have been organizing to challenge the attack on ethnic studies, and to advocate for an anti-racist curriculum that truly aligns with the values and principles of ethnic studies and what that ethnic studies was founded on. And to challenge the attack and to uplift the self-determination of communities of color, and to challenge the idea that no one other than those directly impacted by racism and by oppression should decide what ethnic studies actually is. And so last year in spring, the curriculum, which included Arab American studies, was erased. In August of 2020, Tony Thurmond promised to include Arab American studies, which happened as a result of the relentless and continuous organizing of the Save Arab American Studies Coalition. And then later on, a few months later, found out that in August, found out that, I think a few months after that, found out that they had relegated it to the appendix. So following that, we've been, our coalition has been advocating and organizing against the relegation of the Arab American Studies curriculum to the appendix. And the demands have included calling for the Arab American lesson plan to actually reflect the integrity and of discipline of ethnic studies, to actually question and critique structural racism, which the current curriculum actually does not, and to advocate for the curriculum to actually align with the guiding values of ethnic studies, which at this moment it does not. It has effectively become an all lives matter curriculum. The other demands include making sure that politicians and right-wing political interest groups are not given the authority to dictate the future of education in California, to make sure that ethnic studies curriculum is developed and by ethnic studies educators and not right-wing interest groups or misinformed politicians, and that the CDE, the demand is that, of course, the CDE must return the Arab American curriculum, including Palestine, to its rightful place, which is in the Asian American section of the ethnic studies model curriculum, and that all students in California need an anti-racist, decolonial, and liberatory ethnic studies. With that, I'll just pass it along to Jody. Sorry, I tried to do that in a really short amount of time, but I hope that folks are able to follow that timeline. But I'll pass it along to Jody to talk about a little bit more about the campaign and about who these Zionist organizations are and what their role is in pushing back and undermining ethnic studies. This attack on Arab American studies has become an attack on ethnic studies as a whole and an attempt to undermine ethnic studies as a whole. So this is what the campaign is dedicated to pushing back against. So yeah, I'll pass it to you, Jody.
Thanks, Celine. Can you all hear me? Yeah, and can I share my screen?
Yes, you can.
Okay, so these are these images that everybody's seen. Yeah, they're from the attack on the Capitol last week, and I think that there's been a lot of there's been a lot of publicity for this photo on my left, you know, this anti-Semitic T-shirt, Camp Auschwitz. What has gotten a lot less viewing in the mainstream press is that there were Israeli flags also among the people, these insurrectionists or whatever you want to call them. And this ties in, what's going on in California around ethnic studies ties in really closely with the conversation that you all had, because you know, really the goal of the Zionists at this point is that, you know, the comments that they at the public meeting around the model ethnic studies curriculum, the last set of comment, the last public comment, the right wing, they were saying, we want constructive ethnic studies. We don't want critical ethnic studies. You know, that they want ethnic studies that doesn't make anybody feel bad about the history of the United States. And that's exactly what Trump has been saying, right? So so I wanted to go through like what the role of the Zionists has been in terms of undermining what was an a decolonial, anti-racist, and liberatory ethnic studies that the original folks who wrote the ethnic studies curriculum. And from the second that it was published, there's been a huge and very well-funded and concerted Zionist attack on it. In the first few days after it became public, there were 18,000 comments against it, and almost all focused on why was Arab American studies included, and specifically on the Palestine content. And and it was both a public attack and also a really heavy lobbying attack around legislators, and it was really effective. And only a couple of weeks later, the Newsom held a press conference. Newsom and the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, and they apologized for the language of the draft, and they promised that they would overhaul it. And Newsom promised that the original draft will never see the light of day. And what they were talking about specifically was the content around Palestine. Then, you know, we organized a whole defense of ethnic studies, and the pedagogy, the content, telling the truth, you know, teaching kids the truth about what US history is, and talking about how Arab American history fits into that, and the relationship between the role of the United States around the world and Arab American history inside the US. And what Thurmond did was he essentially let go the original advisory committee that was made up of ethnic studies teachers and educators, almost all people of color. And there was a veil of secrecy around who was doing the revisions. And the first draft that came back was terrible. And there were none of the Arab American studies lessons Arab American studies had been completely pulled out of it, and so had Pacific Islander studies. And then there was a whole fight about what was going to happen, and there have now been 3 revisions, and each one has been weaker than the one before that. And the original legislation was to create a model curriculum that school districts that were interested in implementing ethnic studies could use as a guide. And then there was another piece of legislation that was AB 331 that was to require an ethnic studies class as a requirement for high school graduation. And right before it came up for the vote, they put in the Jewish caucus, which is totally dominated by Zionists. The Jewish caucus of the California state legislature put in what they call guardrail language. And Jesse Gabriel, who's assistant majority whip and co-chair of the Jewish caucus, said exactly what it's for. The best approach is for the legislature to insert guardrails so ethnic studies cannot be used as a vehicle to attack or defame Jews or Israel. This makes it unlawful for any school district in California to use the anti-Semitic or anti-Israel sections of the original draft curriculum, or to otherwise teach or promote anti-Semitic, BDS, or any other curricula that promotes bias or bigotry or discrimination against Jews, Israel, the Israeli American community, or the Jewish community. And as you can see there, he's totally equating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. And as we all know, that's not true. You know, more than half of the Jews in the United States don't agree with Israeli policy. Criticism of Israel is criticism of settler colonialism. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. So even with the guardrail language and even with the really weakened curriculum and the fact that there was no funding for staff development, Newsom still vetoed AB 331. So the next piece of what happened in terms of the Zionist plan to make sure that there's no discussion of Israel, no critical discussion of Israel or Zionism in California schools, is they appointed Anita Freeman to the Instructional Quality Commission, which is the group that was overseeing the ethnic studies model curriculum. She's somebody who has no educational background at all, but she is on the national board of APAC. And she came into the discussions about the model curriculum and totally dominated them at her first meeting. She knows nothing about ethnic studies. At one point she said, "What is neocolonialism?" Her only role there was to make sure that nothing got in about Palestine, and that Arab American studies was really totally whitewashed out. By then we had organized 20,000 public comments in support of Arab American studies and in support of including Palestine and keeping Arab American studies where it belonged in the Asian American studies section of the curriculum. And they didn't even discuss it. It wasn't that they didn't agree, they didn't even talk about it. So the next thing that they did in conjunction with the attacks on a true ethnic studies curriculum is that they rolled out this education to end hate, which Tony Thurman presented as opposition to Trump's attacks on the 1619 Project, which is about re-examining the role of slavery in the development of US history. And Trump's, pulling anti-racism education out of the federal government. And so Tony Thurman made this big case about how California is different. We're gonna fight bias. There are 3 organizations providing professional development for education against hate. One of them is Simon Wiesenthal's Museum of Tolerance, which I understand you all have been looking at. They just received a $225,692 grant from TVTP, which I understand you've also been looking at. And they have a long history of promoting Israel and pushing Zionism and persecution of anybody of Palestinians, Palestinian historians, and anybody who anybody who raises questions about Israel's role and the Nakba or their treatment of Palestinians. So far with education, and one of the things to remember about the Education Against Hate program is that the ethnic studies model curriculum comes with no funding at all for staff development, but this Education Against Hate is well funded, so that districts who don't understand what the problems with the Wiesenthal Center are, it looks like, oh, this is an easy way to fight racism in our school. We'll just get help from these folks. And those of you who went through the California schools or are teachers know that the role of the Museum of Tolerance and facing history, all these different approaches to learning about racism that center the Holocaust as the central event of the central genocide in the history of the world, the central event of racism, and see everything in relationship to it, and use the Holocaust as a defense and a justification for the settler colonialism of Israel. So a couple of weeks ago, the Education Against Hate had their webinar for teachers on anti-Semitism. There were two presenters, both of them were from the Museum of Tolerance. They acted as if anti-Semitism was the main expression of fascism in the United States. They showed a video about Charlottesville that barely mentioned Black people, and they stressed the definition of anti-Semitism that includes any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism. This is just, I attended that seminar just because I wanted to know what was going on. And afterwards, they sent me, the California Department of Education sent me the resources, which included the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. And it's got like 10 parts or something, but I wanted to show you the two that relate to equating anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel. So according to that definition, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of Israel is a racist endeavor, or applying double standards by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic action, are supposedly examples of anti-Semitism. And here are the CDE resources for anti-Semitism, which are all from the Museum of Tolerance. So the California State Department of Education has essentially collapsed itself into the Museum of Tolerance, which links it completely, with the ADL, with AIPAC. They're promoting the same definition of anti-Semitism that Trump is, and for the same reason. So in this period of time when you all are looking at what does the next period of time mean, it's like, I think it's really important to recognize that like these players in California politics who are pushing this anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, anti-ethnic studies approach, they're Democrats. These are not Trump people. This is the progressive end of U.S. politics. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. Do you want me to keep this screen up, Salim, while you talk about next steps?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Jody. And I think this was so good that you talked about this, because during our last meeting, we went more in depth into Simon Wiesenthal Center acceptance of CVE funding, which is rebranded as Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention, and the implications of that. So this is the same organization that's doing all of this undermining of ethnic studies, implementing surveillance in schools. So how can we have a multi-pronged strategy to strengthen our campaign, our campaigns that we're all building out? And so regarding the Save Arab American Studies campaign, I just wanted to share some action steps that we invite folks to participate in. So the action that's really needed in the next few weeks, or the next week, I guess, next week, we have until January 21st to submit public comments. And you can feel free to screenshot this if you want to just to have a list of where you can send public comment to. But you can email ethnicstudies@cde.ca.gov with your public comment. And if you go on the Save Arab American Studies website, you can find talking points and more information about the campaign, other letters, other public comments, letters of support. You can find webinars to help you craft your public comments if you need that. There's also a petition to help build pressure. So there's a general petition that we invite everybody to fill out, and that will be submitted as public comment, I believe, right, Jody? The Empower petition. So
Yep.
Empower Change and AROC have this petition going that we invite folks to fill out, and that itself will be submitted as public comment. And if you're a teacher, if you're an educator, we invite you to fill out the educator petition. And I think Akil's linking all of the documents in the chat, so feel free to save those. Educators, please fill that out to also put pressure on the CDE. And again, the general goals and I guess like the general talking points that the campaign will really be focusing on is to highlight how the CDE, again, is not living up to its mandate to create a model ethnic studies curriculum as outlined by AB 2016, which we talked about earlier, that politicians and right-wing political interest groups should not be given the authority to dictate the future of education in California. And Jody just explained to us so well about the implications of that and how harmful and dangerous that's going to be, and how it's completely undermining ethnic studies and the legacy of ethnic studies and what students and educators of color have been fighting for decades. And the demand that all students in California need anti-racist, decolonial, and liberatory ethnic studies, and we demand that Arab American studies be included in its rightful place, which is in Asian American studies within the ethnic studies curriculum. And again, in addition to all the ways you can support the Save Arab American Studies campaign, again, we also dropped the link to our campaign interest form, focusing more around the surveillance aspect. And for that, the working meeting will be next Wednesday. Also, if folks want to join the Save Arab American Studies Coalition, feel free to reach out to us as well. I don't know, Jody, what the best email for that is, but if you want to drop your email, or you can reach out to me, I can drop my email in the chat, and we can invite you to join the coalition calls and committees. So I'll just drop my email in the chat if anyone's interested in being more involved. But yeah, does anyone have any questions? I know we went a little bit over time, so appreciate everybody for staying on for an extra few minutes. And Jody, do you have anything to add, or does anyone else have any points?
No, I put my name and my email in the chat too. And I just wondered if, like you, I wondered if anybody had questions or comments.
Jody, do you think that you could actually tell everybody just a little bit about the Jewish anti-Zionist campaign right now between some of, I wonder if there's any of that you can share.
Well, you probably know as much as I do.
Okay, well, I will say that that Jody is one of an amazing crew of people who is working with especially JVP in the Bay Area, as well as International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, coordinating Jewish anti-Zionist support for Arab American studies and opposition to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is, again, you know, weaponizing and utilizing the very real concern about anti-Semitism to actually further criminalize Palestinian liberation and solidarity with Palestinians. Is there anything you want to add to that specifically as well?
Nope, that's good.
So if you are Jewish, try to find your JVP chapter wherever you are and see if you can coordinate with JVP Bay Area.
Nice. Thank you so much, Jody, Celine, Akil, for breaking that down. I know that was a wealth of information, right, to put into 30 minutes. So thank you so much for really taking that time to share with folks. Yeah, I know myself as a teacher, just thinking of how these narratives are pushed onto our children, and you know, and so how do we combat that and fight that? So yeah, thank you again for folks who hung in there with us as well. And I just want to invite you all to our meeting next Tuesday. It's our general coalition meeting, where we really look at all of our fights, and we do different political analysis, and also ways to join as well. So I don't know if any more announcements regarding that. I don't know if Hamid, if you have any announcements for next Tuesday.
Yeah, just next Tuesday, we are going to be, that's our general meeting on next Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. And so we wanted to bring back the conversation around abolition, because we know that how that conversation is getting mainstreamed, which is good. There's more echoes, people are speaking about it, but with that, along that comes a whole lot of different ways that people are imagining it or looking at it. Even like, what does even defunding mean? Is it on our journey towards abolition, or is it like, you know, just, well, we can only have so much police or whatever? So we're gonna have some really awesome crew. We've invited Dylan Rodriguez, who's done some tremendous amount of work on abolition. Rachel Herzing is going to be there. Who's one of the co-founders of the Critical Resistance. Our own Chella is going to be a part of the conversation as well. And then also invited Aldo from Color Coded, who are our partners in Embody Abolition fight as well in that journey. So looking forward to next Tuesday's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And yeah, with that, we'll close. Thank you again so much, Underground Scholars, folks here at the Coalition, Jody, Celine, everybody. And yeah, just wishing you all a good night and good health, and hope to see you all next Tuesday.
And this will
Thanks
be on
you
our
all.
website. Yeah, the video is going to be on our website by next Friday. So thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.